On a tangent of sorts, did you ever figure out what the name is going to be for the upcoming NWHL season? I know you were looking for suggestions.
Ah, I love that. So I'm going with N double. So N dub is often kind of something that is used, when you have a W, you shorten it with dub. So I thought instead of calling it the N wubble or the nwubble, I don't know, that just didn't seem to roll right. I think you get rid of the W, you put the DU in there as the W, N double. And so that's what I've been going with. And I have some players that have given it the thumbs up. So we're going with N double. Snow globe, I will also accept.
Now, have you spoken to anyone at NBC Sports about potentially adopting that since they will be broadcasting the playoffs this year?
Well, I guess I should trademark N double, right? That's the first thing in case there's any merch out there or something. I don't want to fumble the bag, as they say. But I know that NBC Sports is going to be broadcasting both semifinals and the final for the NWHL or N double playoffs and the Isabel Cup finals is what it's known. They play for the Isabel Cup. At least the NWHL has a name for its trophy. I went on a whole rant. Who was I talking to? Oh, I remember Jasmine Baker and Kevin, who did the Origin collection. We had a fun conversation about how the WNBA trophy it doesn't have a name. It's just the WNBA trophy. But that's a whole nother aside. But the Isabel Cup playoffs will be on broadcast TV. And what we learned from the Wubble, what we learned from the NWSL, the National Women's Soccer League, is that an increase in nationally broadcast games, women's professional league games, led to exponentially higher ratings and viewership than the year prior. So I'm really excited for the NWHL to be on national television because I'm hoping that trend will continue and that folks certainly from Minnesota, I mean, the Whitecaps are still the reigning Isabel Cup champions because unfortunately the 2020 Isabel Cup was canceled. That would have been between Minnesota and the Boston Pride, who won the first ever Isabel Cup. So you got to watch the Whitecaps. They have nice sweaters, Mike. I don't know if you've seen the white with the
Mm-hmm.
nice backdrop. I love that. I love that. That's clean.
I've watched some of the broadcasts actually because a couple of my broadcasting buddies do their home games.
There you
Alexis
go.
Pearson and Alex Westad. It's a small community, the sports announcers and writers, so we all know each other in
Very
some
true.
way, shape, or form. Well, speaking of influence and growth, you certainly have done that. I'm just curious when you found out that you were included in the list of PG social media award winners. There were a lot of categories, but hey, a win is a win is a win. And I have the list here. So, how when did you find out, and what does it mean to be included in a list that features Renee Montgomery and Karan Butler, Marshawn Lynch, Crystal Dangerfield, last year's Rookie of the Year? I could go on and on. We would need a whole other show. Naomi Osaka from tennis, Angel McContry, who you spoke of earlier. Even Tiger Woods got a nod. So you're you're on a list with some pretty esteemed company.
Yeah, it's honestly kind of wild. I'll answer how I found out. I kind of saw the tweet. I guess my handle popped up and I was like, oh, PG Sports, really cool. I thought maybe it was like a link to something that I had written, and I was like, awards, like what's this about? I had no idea. I was very surprised. I As much as I love to talk, I almost never talk about myself like when it comes to these type of things. So it's been a little bit wild, but I'm very thankful, obviously. You know this, Mike. A lot of work goes into what we do, and depending on a lot of different factors that don't always have to do with your work style or your work ethic. You can sometimes take off, or sometimes you can just kind of, you know, drop into the void. And so it's nice to know that the hard work and dedication that I've put into this and the style, the care that I take for the style that I bring to sports broadcasting and sports journalism is is appreciated, because again, my style is different. I'm not a journalist. I didn't go to J school, and that's not what I was trained to do. But I think my unique position working in the nonprofit space and having a mind for organizing and advocacy has actually positioned me really well to talk about women's sports and this moment in sports for the athlete activist. And so I'm very honored and proud to keep the passions that I have moving in unison.
I am curious, since you do have a lot of friendships in the women's hockey community, when you saw that list and you are in the media category, of course, in the athlete category for women's hockey, Blake Bolden got the nod. Have the two of you shared any conversations about the fact that the two of you now have this common thread?
Blake has actually been really excited for me for this award. She's told me so, personally and privately, and also via social media. And honestly, I think that's probably one of the more overwhelming parts of it. Um, First ever women's hockey game that I watched, Blake Bolden was on the ice. And I remember seeing her shot and being like, wow, that person shoots the puck pretty hard. Like, I'm still learning hockey, don't know anything, didn't know she was a defender or any of that. And then I was like, oh man, I think she's black. And I was like, whoa, black people hockey. Like, I didn't know that was really a thing. And I tell her that story. I tell people that story all the time because it was that moment that sparked me essentially getting into sports journalism. So to be honored alongside Blake is honestly just, it's the most overwhelming part of it all. If I'm being completely honest, to have her support over the years has been great, and it really truly means a lot to me, that she and other people have been supportive of me. But again, to share that platform and to see Blake also grow, um, because she's not playing as many games as she was a few years ago. And I hope that there's more to come from her as far as an athlete being a player on the ice. Um, but if not, I am completely honored and thrilled to have seen her play live. And I'm not surprised, but I am completely uh, just proud and I'm just proud to see what she's doing now and to see her find her voice. So and thank you for that question though, because honestly, I don't know that anyone's asked me that, but it really does mean a lot to be honored alongside Blake Bolden in the hockey category.
Well, I had to throw that in there because of your hockey and basketball credentials. And it goes back to, I don't know what kind of rapport you have. I remember meeting you at the 2018 All Star game for the WNBA. I should point that out in Minneapolis. And some of the people in that gathering, yourself, Ari Chambers, a Forbes 30 under 30 recipient, I believe, in sports through her work at Bleacher Report, highlight her. I don't know what kind of conversations you have, but like the two of you've been making some power moves this last year. And it's like, I hope the two of you have given yourself some pat on the back. You may have seen Candice Dupree tried to drop that 30 under 30 and Ari tried to deflect it in a humorous way, but it goes to what you said. You put in the work to get those distinctions.
Wow. Yeah. Ari Chambers is another one that, obviously different categories, and Ari is just completely blowing up. And I remember meeting Ari for the first time in Seattle, actually, which was that the year before the Minnesota? I think it was the year before.
2017. Yep.
Yeah,
If you're talking All-Star game, Seattle
All
hosted
Star.
the year
Yep.
prior.
Okay, so the year before you and I met at an All Star game, I met Ari in 2017 out in Seattle, and I remember just being like, "Whoa! Like, who is this?" She was dressed to the nines per usual, curls were looking fabulous, and that's a different vibe than I give off. And so I was like, "Oh, okay." Like, but Ari is one of the sweetest, kindest people. We met, and she was just instantly supportive and like asking questions, and I was just so impressed. with Ari when I met her and when I got to see her work. And since then, we have different approaches, at least as far as I think what we offer public facing as far as content. We have different approaches and have kind of fallen into different lanes, but we are extremely supportive of one another. Ari is one of the people that encouraged me to get in front of camera. That's not necessarily, people don't believe me when I say this, but that's not necessarily something I would have done a handful of years ago, I guess, 3, 4 years ago, before meeting Ari. Um, and then there are a lot of ways that we're very similar in how we just take a lot of time and are very passionate about telling a good story and telling a story that an athlete is going to be proud about, but also that's going to be real. So we're not necessarily, we do make quick friends, but with other people. And I think you need to when you're in this industry, but it's not just about raising people up just to kind of, pump their tires. It's lifting people up who do good things and are good people. And because they are in women's sports, are often overlooked. That's how I feel about Blake. I know Ari has a lot of stories that she could tell about different athletes that she's been able to elevate. I mean, you mentioned Renee Montgomery, who for a lot of people has been a revelation right in the last few months. But if you're paying attention, again, these are stories that those of us who know have seen over the years, and we're just getting to see it elevated now. So, I mean, again, I can't say enough great things about Ari. She's been a great support. Hopefully, I also can impart my auntie wisdom. I think the auntie nickname actually came from an exchange that Ari and I had. I remember when we used to, just be doing sing-alongs, driving to and from Mohegan Sun from New York together back when, we were pulling all the pennies that we could together to cover games. And now to see what she's doing with Highlight Her and Bleacher Report is just fantastic. And it's what you want to see. You want to see those who are really committed and think differently about the work be able to be elevated.
You spoke of the Renee Montgomery revelation. I remember covering her as a rookie for Minnesota. It was my first year in the WNBA, and then she came back. In a sense, I'm not surprised that she's taking off like she is. Obviously, we didn't have these social discussions back in 2009 or even when she returned the first time in 2015, but you could tell she had an effervescent bubbliness about her that makes her approachable, accessible, and comfortable. She's doing her own podcast now. And she and we had some friendly conversations when I would interview her. So I'm not surprised one bit that she's doing what she's doing now because I saw the seeds that were planted all those years ago. I wanted to get back to something. I don't know how much time you have, but you spoke of your non-traditional path into media. You didn't go to journalism school. I went to the U of M, got my degree in journalism and mass communications, but I came in more as a sports fan and observer. I understand you were an athlete back in the day, but I guess in that sense, between that and your work with the Children's Defense Fund, your seeds for the work that you're doing now, as far as your storytelling, they were planted back then. But I'm curious, since you didn't have that traditional path that maybe some of your colleagues did, what led you into the realm of media?
Yeah. So, I mentioned Blake, or you actually mentioned her first, which is actually very impressive. It's not very often that someone else mentions Blake Bolden before I do, but that's just how much of an impact that Blake has kind of had on my trajectory. So I mentioned going to that game. I also always make sure to mention that it was my sister that got really into hockey, my sister Jessie, and I was really just there as a former athlete, D1 softball player at Elon University, go Phoenix. And I just really wanted to get my sister into sports because she really wasn't into sports. She'd come to a baseball game here and there with me, but more just to kind of hang out, not because she loved baseball, but she really was loving hockey. And so we went to these games. I talked about seeing Blake on the ice, realizing, oh, it's a black chick. And that just kind of catching my eye, and knowing nothing else about any of the other Olympians that were on her team or anything like that. That's just who I gravitated toward. Um, but from there, you know how it is. You talked about being a fan. When you're a fan, you want to know, especially in this information age, you want to know as much as you can about your team. You follow them on social media, you go to all the fan blogs, you watch all the videos you can on YouTube. And that's what I started trying to do, but there just wasn't a lot out there. So it was a handful of places that I could go to find out more about women's hockey, because I didn't really, what I knew about hockey is what I got from a Disney movie, right? The Mighty Ducks, which there's so many Minnesota connections, Mike. Like, I feel
Mm-hmm.
like I love this. I'm loving this. But
Mm-hmm.
anyway, I went to that diner that Charlie Conway's mom worked at when I was
Mickey's
in Minnesota.
Diner.
That's the one. I went
Mickey's
there. I was like,
Diner.
oh
I've been
my gosh,
there.
that's so wild. Yeah, when I went to Minnesota to cover the NWHL, I think it was the All-Star game. Yeah, that I called out there. Anyway, so you do all this research, and I'm sending emails. I'm like, hey, like, you're one of the only outlets that I see covering this. Like, tell me more. Where can I go? And they were like, hey, well, like, what's your vibe? What are you doing? And I was like, oh, well, I do a little bit of this. I played sports. They were like, well, you're a former athlete. I was like, yeah, but not like, I never played hockey. They were like, don't worry about it. Come on the podcast. This is My W Sports. Luis Sanchez, got to give him a shout out. Luis was like, come on, join the podcast, write a show. Hey, we'll even send you as part of our media to go cover the NWHL playoffs. I was like, okay, let's do it. I've always enjoyed writing more for, my own leisure time, and just something that I would do creatively. As a political science major, I know how to write papers, that's for sure, and analyze. So that part of analysis, and always being a fan of sports and an athlete, I knew that I knew sports. I knew that I had a degree that really taught me how to write and analyze. So it was just kind of a combination of passion and profession that came together. As far as the Children's Defense Fund, you mentioned that, and that is something that I've been a part of since I was in college. That piece of it, I think, again, is what makes me uniquely, um, I don't, not necessarily qualified, but it gives me a unique perspective to come from a child advocacy organization where I'm doing a lot of education, I'm doing a lot of learning about policy. Because when it comes to equity in sports and equity for women in sports, you have to know policies like Title IX. You have to be able to know about education and history. And again, I had that lens, and that was the type of writing and research that I was already doing. And so I think that I was able to bring that along with the analysis, of game analysis, and being able to storytell. So it was just like this nice mix of things. And I've been very blessed that opportunities have continued to come. And people, I mentioned Ari Chambers, have to give a shout out though to Mike Murphy, who was the first person who encouraged me to get in front of a camera and talk about ice hockey as an analyst. And I did that with Matt Falkenberry, who was the voice of the Riveters for a very long time. So I got to thank those guys too. But I just kind of had an opportunity. It was something that I felt passionate about, that I was having a lot of fun learning and doing. And the rest, as they say, is history. I mean, 2020 was crap in a lot of ways, but personally and professionally, I reached a lot of goals that I never, they weren't even goals. I didn't even know to dream to one day be a New York Times published sports writer. I never had that dream. Um, to write a story, a daily cover story about Cheryl Swoops and the Air Swoops, the legacy of the Air Swoops for Sports Illustrated. I never dreamed that. I never would have thought to dream it. But that's exactly what 2020, some of the things that 2020 brought me. And I'm very blessed, and I'm very thankful for my sister Jessie, for Blake Bolden, Luis Sanchez, Mike Murphy, Matt Falkenberry. Those are some of the people that really encouraged me, especially in the early years.
I guess if you're going to toot your own horn, which you are welcome to do on this podcast, I always tell my guests there are no wrong answers. And I get it. I think, are more modest with ourselves than we are with others because for us, it just feels like part of the routine. But, no, there are some wins. So it goes back to another colleague of ours, Blake Dudonis, who is the head coach at Wisconsin River Falls. His significant other, I wonder what she's up to now.
Yeah, I don't know.
I,
Assistant
I,
coach at some place. I don't know.
Yeah, I think they wear maroon and gold.
Yeah, I'm looking around because Blake actually sent me a hat.
He
He sent
Blake's.
me a hat. It's usually on display. I must have moved it, but Blake Dudonis.
that'll be
Yeah,
the next installment of your podcast
yeah, I
series.
gotta.
Instead of social justice in the NWHL, it's where is Blake's hat?
Yeah, find Blake's hat. He definitely gave it to me. It used to be up here somewhere, but I've been moving my setup around. But anyway,
what he said though struck a chord with me, and this is kind of how I operate. How some folks have 1 year, 5 year plans, and he said I don't really go with that. I go with the attitude of how do I get a little bit better, a little bit smarter every day, and then things will come to fruition. So my wins, maybe they haven't led me to the New York Times or Sports Illustrated yet, but actually my wins were uh, a reflection on the prior work that I've done. So in 2020, I can say that a clip of my broadcast coverage was featured on ESPN ABC. I don't know if you saw the Born to Play documentary.
nice. No, I haven't seen it.
It's a women's football documentary. A producer embedded herself with the Boston Renegades for a
Yeah, I know
season.
them. Yeah.
And like you said, was looking for archives. There wasn't a lot out there. So she came across two broadcasts that I did when I had a partnership with the Women's Football Alliance. And she asked me,
Was it the Vixen in Minnesota?
the Vixen, they weren't in the WFA
In the
yet.
same
There was
league.
another team.
Okay.
The Vixen moved over a short time later.
Okay.
And then I became friends with their public address announcer. I had him on my podcast last year, and that's led me to some. It goes back to your sister bringing you on this path. You never know who you're going to meet. That's why I keep doing this. But this producer asked me, would you be okay if I used a clip of your program? I'm like, oh, go for it, because it was 6 years old. I'm like, yeah, I'm not making. There's not a lot of value that I could, scrub, if you know what I'm saying. And I'm not very territorial like that. It's like, hey, if it helps tell you a good story, go for it. And then my fellow colleague, who is the PA announcer, he told me, hey, I heard your voice on ESPN. I'm like, what? And I looked it up. And so I shot back to the producer. You didn't tell. It's like, I had no idea this was going to be on ESPN. I mean, I agreed anyway, but it's like, man, I wish I would have known. I would have told people about it. So
That's awesome.
it debuted on ESPN, and then it was rerun on ABC because there weren't a lot of sports at the time. I can't say I've had any autograph requests or offers yet, but my voice, at least for a split second, was on national broadcast television.
That's fantastic. I'm gonna have to go find that.
Yep. And well, the game itself is on my page. The documentary, I think you can find on the Watch ESPN app still, but I'm not entirely sure. But that was one of those wins. I guess getting back to your work, how exciting for you is it for you that you've done a lot of work in the WNBA and NWHL, and you spoke of the NWSL? I know you are a huge advocate for women's sports, but to reach the platform that you have where you've had the opportunity to call NWHL games, you've been able to tell some fun and amazing and high profile stories for the New York Times. You spoke of the history of the air swoops. I remember that was the first women's shoe endorsement, if I'm correct, which was a big deal back then. And I remember how big a deal it was when Maya Moore got the Jordan brand endorsement.
Mhm.
And well, even when she's not playing, she still finds a way to get wins. Let's not forget what she did in 2020. But looking at your history and this unscripted path,
Very,
right?
very unscripted.
You had no idea this was going to happen, but
No
to
idea.
now be at the center of the WNBA, the NWHL, and to find yourself with bylines on The Athletic, the New York Times, Sports Illustrated, what do you make of these accomplishments?
Again, it's wild. Sometimes I just laugh, like with my family, and I'm like, what is even happening? I obviously am a storyteller, so I'm gonna eat up some more time here, Mike, in our conversation. But I don't know if you're familiar with Foo Fighters and their Sonic Highways series, where they would go to different cities and record in like these iconic recording studios, and they would then write a song telling the history of that city and that studio. And I believe it was the Chicago episode where they're talking to this gentleman. I think is it Buddy Guy? I'm forgetting his name, and I even wrote about this. But and the guy says, I was looking for a dime, and I found a quarter. I was looking for 10 cents. I found 25. That's kind of what I feel about, when I think about this now career that I've paved out. I was just, looking to find out where I could learn more about Blake Bolden and the at the time New York Riveters, and that has spun into me telling the stories about Blake Bolden and the Riveters. I mean, I got chills a little. We were talking about the air swoops. Well, Blake Bolden has the first signature hockey stick named for a woman hockey player. Uh, and that came out this year. So it's just wild to be along, not a sonic highway, right? But I don't know what the equivalent would be, but along this journey with a lot of athletes who have made an indelible mark on my life and my career as an adult. It's really humbling. I am so thankful that my sister got into hockey while watching the 2014 Winter Olympics. But what I think more so why that story kind of blows my mind is because imagine if somehow my sister hadn't found out about a women's hockey team coming to New York. I'm sure I would be just fine, and I loved the work that I do, and I still work in the nonprofit space. But I literally never imagined any of these things in my wildest dreams. And when you open up the opportunities, when you open up highways, right, and you open up that access to people, it's amazing what people can realize. And I'm living proof of that. And again, I'm very honored. I'm very blessed. Uh, and it's taken a lot of persistence. It's not like it's all been easy, but um, more often than not, I'm just very blessed. But I also take that as motivation to open up that highway, to open up that door, to allow someone else, regardless of their age, um, to imagine a completely different opportunity that maybe never crossed their mind. And those are the stories that I like to try and tell, stories that I think are about people awakening into who they are becoming, or will offer the opportunity for any one of us um, to feel empowered. Um, and that's the type of work that I was doing in the nonprofit space as well. I was teaching young people to learn about policy and advocacy so they could advocate for themselves, and they don't always have to wait on adults, that they can use their own voice and their own resources to make outcomes better for them. And that's ultimately what I think my purpose is in life, if I'm being completely honest. Will it always be in the sports space? I don't know, but I'm having a heck of a lot of fun, Mike. I'll tell you. I freaking love sports, man. I really do.
I had
Even
no
though,
idea.
yeah, yeah, I know. Shocker, right? I love sports. I really do love sports. And maybe I'll stay in sports, maybe I won't. I also joke around with my family. I'm not even 35 years old yet, and I've had at least 3 careers. So like one every decade of my life. So who knows what'll be next? But man, I'm just so thrilled to be along this ride, and I hope that my story, or the stories that I tell of other people in particular, just really inspire people to definitely never give up, and to not sell yourself short. Impossible is nothing, you know, that's a saying that we hear, but I think I'm kind of living that, and it's wild. It's really wild to see, but it's really exciting.
I did think of an equivalent for Blake Bolden's hockey stick. You were talking about Foo Fighters and Freeways. I think I know what the equivalent would be.
Oh yeah, give it to us.
I think I would call it the snow globe.
I should have seen that one. There we go. We're
You
back
didn't
to
see
this. We're
you
back
didn't
to
see
the
that
snow
coming?
globe. I know. I'm not a
Oh,
psychic. I'm not a
okay, I'll
psychic.
give you that because and maybe you don't know me as well, but those who do know me understand that if there's a low hanging fruit or one liner or pun, I am all in.
Take it. You're
I'm
gonna
a huge
grab it.
MCU fan. I consider it a bad influence because to me the MCU has indicated that it's okay to make quips all the time and you'll go places. Deadpool will be a part of that too. So I'm like, oh, I guess you could just quip your way to the top.
There we
I
go.
digress.
I'm getting the snow globes ready for
I
everyone.
digress.
Shaking up life. There we go.
I'm curious, Erica, as a sports writer, I wouldn't want to ask you what your favorite story is because I would imagine each story you write has impacted you in a unique way. And like you said, you just want to keep moving. Like one success, one story leads you to the next one. I feel that way with the podcast. It just started as a way to pass time during quarantine. But over time, it dawned on me that I used to write for Excel Sports. I think you did too. And
Yeah.
before that, Full Court. Both those sites no longer exist. And all of the
Yeah.
articles published on those sites went away.
Yeah.
And to me, like that's a huge piece of history lost. I One of my favorite stories with Excel was writing about Rebecca Brunson and how the whole Change Starts With Us inspired her to look back into her own family history. I think you may remember her grandmother took a stand against the Nazi occupation in World War II and was almost killed for it.
Mhm.
Now I'm rambling, but I was going to say, what are some stories, Erica, that you've written or published or researched that, as you were writing it or as it was being published throughout the process, something that really resonated with you, where you learned something you never would have expected to absorb?
Wow, that's a fantastic question, and it's really tough. You know, I'm trying not to fall into the recency bias, but again, there have been a lot of really cool um, benchmarks again that I didn't even intentionally set in 2020. But I think um, I think I'm going to take a different road less traveled. Actually, a good story that I wrote about Leisure Clarendon, and it's probably up there. But the first story I was able to tell, where I really got into the research and I spoke to multiple athletes, and that again was kind of like my 2016 moment, laying a foundation that then later became what now is a YouTube series, social justice in women's sports. And that was something that I wrote for the Victory Press. I spoke to women hockey players, from different cultural backgrounds and ethnic backgrounds. And I went into that piece because being a college athlete, a Division I softball player at a school in the South, in the early 2000s, was very lonely as a Black New Yorker. There were a lot of things culturally that clashed, and it was very isolating, very lonely. And I didn't realize that I wasn't, I know that I lived that experience, but I didn't really realize how much that experience impacted me until I started asking Black and Latina and Native and Indigenous hockey players about their experience in hockey culture, which again, my foray into hockey was through Black people. Black women at that. My sister, Blake Bolden, Black Girl Hockey Club. I've just been very lucky in that way that I've always found someone that looked like me. Um, but I started realizing that that wasn't the case. And so I wrote this story for the Victory Press about these women navigating through the whiteness of hockey and thus the whiteness of society. And every year I've found myself gravitated towards players of color, BIPOC players, and wanting to just not always for a story I'm going to write the next day, the next week, but just to talk to them. And flash forward to March 2020, I was in the process of doing a little bit of learning, and I invested in shout out to Sean Cannell from Think Media, learning how to do video and stuff. Like, again, Ari Chambers also challenged me to get in front of camera, and I started pulling those things together because I knew I needed those resources. And then George Floyd was killed, and I saw the reaction, and something very specific happened between Ali Thunstrom, actually from the Minnesota Whitecaps, and here we go again, Blake Bolden. And we were having this conversation offline, and I asked them if they would join me on camera to have a very important conversation about, essentially, because I was moderating but also participating, the three of us from very different backgrounds, three different cities, talking about the impact of what happened in Minneapolis and George Floyd. And Ali Thunstrom tweeted something that sparked a lot of negative feedback. Um, and she spoke to Blake and I about that individually. And then we had a conversation together. And it was that story that I wrote for the Victory Press about 2 or 3 years prior to that, that planted the seed for me to continually have those conversations. So then by the time 2020 rolls around and I happen to be taking a YouTube course to learn more about YouTube and video and social media, again, everything just kind of came together at this intersect at saying the right time seems kind of weird, but it was the timing aligned, I think, is a better way of saying it. And yeah, that story for sure. I mentioned Leisha Clarendon. Leisha Clarendon and Harrison Brown are two players that I'm very thankful for, because learning about their use of pronouns. Harrison Brown is the first transgender athlete in the NWHL, and Leisha Clarendon uses all pronouns: she, they, he, him, um, and having conversations about their identity. I related to the larger conversation about um, having to really struggle and fight and honor who you are. But of course, I don't know, of course, I'm not assuming people understand how I identify, but I don't identify in the same ways that they do, Harrison and Leisha. And so being able to have that conversation, but from a different perspective, was also really impactful. So I've written about Harrison Brown, Brownie as we call him, and Leisha Clarendon just recently for The Athletic. So that stands out. Um, and then I don't know that I wrote a specific story, but there was a moment. I'm tempted to say the air swoop story. That was very fantastic. But the moment that, again, planted the seed for that was I was able to cover the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame when Cheryl Swoops was inducted. And I remember being there and I was like, I'm here for Cheryl Swoops. Everybody else is cool, whatever. But I'm not talking to them. I'm here to cover Cheryl Swoops, my favorite player. I wore number 22 as a basketball player and then as a softball player in college because of Cheryl Swoops. Um, and so did the interview, kept it professional, focused on Cheryl Swoops, got a lot of great content. And I remember driving home. I was in a little bit of traffic, so I pulled over at, like, I don't know, like a fast food place. And I started getting overwhelmed. And I called my mom, like I'm 12 years old or something. I wasn't 12, by the way. This was like 3 or 4 years ago. Called my mom and I just started crying because I spoke to Cheryl Swoops. And probably not the greatest story to say, like, from a professional perspective, but that actually happened. And it just goes to show that, again, like, the impact that Cheryl had on basketball made a huge impact on me. And to be able to share and, have, like, look her in the eye and be there as she got her orange blazer for the first time, and that meant a lot to me. And since I've written lots of stories about Cheryl Swoops, and I don't cry or call my mom after anymore, usually. No. It was that one time. It happened one time, and I let it all out. But those are the things that stand out. So yeah, again, I mentioned some of those other things in passing, but I think I'm starting to see a theme here, Mike. I'm really drawn to what I believe to be the seed that was planted. And those are the moments that when I think back on a lot of what I've done, those are the ones that resonate the most. And I'm very thankful for the people who've planted those seeds, because almost always I've had a full circle moment. There's only one more person that I would interview that maybe I would call my mom and cry after. I'm not going to say it here. I'll maybe tell you offline, but once I get that interview, I can retire. I can retire.
As SpongeBob would say, I'm a head out after that. And I know you shared the photo of your blazer and your Cheryl Swoops jersey. I actually got to interview Cheryl Swoops a couple of times when she made that last run with Tulsa, but then when she spent some time as a coach at Loyola in Chicago.
Mhm.
And we didn't, I don't think we talked a whole lot about her playing career at the time. And going back to what you said, maybe it wasn't the most professional moment, but it goes back to earlier in our conversation. We do this because we're fans, and this is our way of staying involved, getting to meet people, because neither of us, maybe we're lucky or talented enough, or in my case, both, to get a professional contract to play. So it's okay if you have a little geek out moments.
For
And
sure.
I'll say this, I covered the WNBA for 10 years, took a little break because I was dealing with a lot. It was getting overwhelming with my MLB job, but I was watching Wobble games last year, and I certainly have never ruled out going back. So I've never said I won't go there again. It's just I got to know when it's right so I don't overexert myself again.
Makes sense.
But going back to what you said, I look at the rapport that I built with Cheryl Reeve and some of the Minnesota players. We knew when to turn it on and we knew when to turn it off in terms of professionalism. So when the mic was off, Cheryl and I, we would shoot the moon, and I've done that with some other players, past and present, since then. When it's time to be serious, when it's time to do business, we know exactly to flip that switch so we don't let our relationships get in the way of what we're trying to do. And I think it helps that we have that understanding that whatever I write is not how I see them personally. I'm just there to tell you who wins, who loses, what happened, maybe my predictions, my thoughts, but I'm not going to look at you negatively because you didn't win a game you were supposed to, or you didn't beat a team by 20. I know that when that was a first world problem for Lynx fans, I'm going, hey, win point differential. This isn't the World Cup. Point differential means nothing.
Yeah, right.
There are no easy games. If it's easy, it's only because the team that made it look easy put in the work, and it's not easy work to do that. So yeah, I think it's okay. You're allowed to have that fandom moments. I know Ari had some of those too. I'll never forget the rapport she had with Candace Parker, for example. And I'm like, how the hell did she not out of jealousy, but it's like the way she connects with players. So yes, we're not robots. I mean, we're humans,
Right.
and we will have our moments. Delisha Milton Jones, Arminty Harrington, and I, we become pen pals. When I'm not interviewing them, we'll go back and forth. So yeah, we're that line I think was blurred years ago.
Yeah. Well,
Uh,
I mean, after watching The Last Dance, I took myself off the hook. So I was
oh
like,
yeah.
Ahmad Rashad was just doing it all.
Hey, well, and he was, and that friendship with Jordan, helped him. It's kind of funny too. I had no idea he was an NFL player already. He had a long history with the Vikings, and I grew up in Minnesota. I knew of him through his NBA work.
Right. Yeah.
So like, how crazy is that? Or, and I told Delisha, like, yeah, I wish a younger me would have been more embraceful of the women's game, because there was a lot of moments I would like to see, but it's like there's no bad time. There is no there is no late period, if you will. I am curious though, Erica, since you were an athlete, you played college softball for Elon University. You mentioned playing basketball as well. And who knows, maybe you would have had that career in hockey. I think you would have done well too. Hockey and basketball, though, kind of overlap. And when you mentioned Mighty Ducks, I'm like, yeah, I'm glad we have some more women's hockey references now.
Yes,
Not that the Mighty
seriously.
Ducks is terrible, but
I mean, Julie the cat, I'm still mad about that. Like, I don't know what Gordon Bombay was thinking, but I digress.
yeah, they're bringing it back. I'm not sure how it's going to turn out, but hey, we'll see. And then go figure. They they get a pro team out of it,
Yeah.
and then they beat our team in that one
Oh,
conference semi
uh,
back in '03. But hey, what we'll always have the Mighty Ducks. And when you mentioned Mickey's and some of the filming locations, I actually had an old friend of mine who interviewed Emilio Estevez while he was shooting the film,
wow. Very cool.
which which is kind of surreal. But as an athlete, you and I, we're going to need a whole series of our own because I find ourselves digressing into all these tangents because of
Yeah,
our
right?
shared passion for sports. But as an athlete, you could pick any moment as an athlete. I don't know how deep your career was. I know you played at the college level, but what was your most exciting moment and your most embarrassing moment?
Oh, wow. I feel like the embarrassing moment is probably easier. I was a walk on at Elon, and, I fought really hard even to get in the lineup as as a pinch runner. Uh, for whatever reason, I was more valuable as the bullpen catcher sometimes. Sometimes I had to hop over the gate, take off all of the catcher's equipment, go around the bases. And then, of course, that would be the play that the bunt is on and the batter pops up the bunt. So I'm out like a sitting duck. So then I gotta, run back to the dugout, put my helmet down, hop back over the fence to then warm up the pitcher for game two. So although that's not the most embarrassing, I remember there were some games we were playing in Florida and they have those like they're not even fences, they're like mesh curtains or whatever that they
I think,
stake into the ground.
yeah, I
You
know
know
what
what
you're
I'm talking
talking
about?
about. I covered some high school games where they don't have fences or the dimensions are too long, so they put in that mesh barrier,
It's like,
which is
it's
very forgiving, almost too
it,
forgiving.
exactly. So the most embarrassing moment that I can remember, and I guess it's the most embarrassing because I still think of it to this day, is I was playing outfield. I must have been in left field, and there comes a freaking bomb is hit, and we're running. Me and the center fielder. I had the beat on the ball, and I get to the gate or whatever, and I like extend my hand, and it's my mitt hand because I'm looking for it, and I extend it, and somehow it gets wrapped because it's not a real gate. It gets wrapped up in the top part and like the rope or whatever that holds it together. I get caught, so I can't catch the ball, and then I'm falling because it doesn't hold your weight. It's a nothing piece of mesh. So I'm falling over, don't catch the ball. I'm trying to get my glove hand out. It's just a mess. A mess. And like I said, I don't get starts. I don't get minutes. So that was terrible. That was embarrassing. Two moments though, both also happened in Florida because in softball, we have our preseason in Florida where it's a little warmer around this time of year. Um, Two moments. One was I had been working really hard, was never a great hitter, definitely for contact, had a lot of base speed, but I was working on hitting the inside pitch with my coach, working really hard, really trying to crack the lineup. And I was playing in this game in Florida, and the pitcher kept throwing me inside. I hate inside pitches. I'm blown away all day, all day, all day. But she kept pitching me inside. But I've been working on it, and I was just cranking these bombs, but they were not. They weren't fair. Like I was too quick, which never happened. But I was working on it. So that was fun. And there was this one bomb that I hit. By the time the ball came down, it was eventually caught, but I was already at third base by the time it was caught. I was the closest to a home run I ever got in a game. That was one, just because I had been working so hard on hitting the inside pitch, and I was crushing it that day. I was very proud of that. The other time is actually my first. I almost said professional. No, my first collegiate hit was in Florida. First game that I played, and we were playing Fordham. And the reason that that's important is because growing up in New York, I had friends that I played travel ball with that were on the Fordham team. So I'm at bat. I get to first base. I think I hit a single, and then I advanced to third. And I'm at third base. The batter on from my team is coming up to bat, and I hear Erica, Erica, like someone whispering my name. And I look over, and it's my teammates, my former teammates from travel ball. We played from like 14 up until who knows together, and they were like waving and cheering me on from the Fordham bench. So that's probably the top moment. But I really enjoyed knocking the crap out of the ball on the inside pitch in that one game, even though I didn't get the home run. But those are the moments that I remember.
Hey, those inside pitches, I worked at MLB for a couple of years as a StatCast operator, but yeah, those inside pitches, they're not easy to work around. So
They're
yeah,
not. Gotta have quick
and you played
hands.
in the era before analytics and exit velocity and launch angles, when
Yeah.
before hitters were trying to get home runs on purpose.
Yeah,
Be capable
exactly.
of that.
I was just like ticked off. She kept throwing it in there. So I was whipping those hands through and just couldn't keep it fair or not, you know, in a straight line enough that it soared out of there. But
Well, I don't have a lot of embarrassing athlete stories because I'm not a good loser, so I'm like I actually like broadcasting and covering it more because I know I have no control.
oh
That
yeah,
seems
I'm pretty
weird,
bad.
but I mean that sounds weird, but it's like for me it's a relief. I don't have to worry about,
I
screwing
understand.
up. I don't have to worry about anything. I just get to sit back, watch a game, and I have to write about it later. So I mean it's not like I'm just there for free. I remember when one coach of a high school game, it was a big game last year. I did some Hopkins games. You probably know about Paige Beckers. I'm sure we all are going to know about Paige Beckers in the next few years.
Yep.
And the coach was like, "Oh, you want to come so you can get in for free?" I'm like, "Well, obviously, like that's a nice perk." But I said, "No, I want to go down there because I want to, put my broadcast. I want to give you the treatment that I've been doing for years." And
Right.
it got to a point where I don't know if it's going to happen this year with all of the COVID restrictions, and there's still so much uncertainty. But I remember last season there was this girl who came up to me and asked me to take a picture from, just
That's
because she saw
awesome.
me at another game. So yeah, I've told this story before, but I have to remind myself when I get back out there that people do watch me on YouTube, and some of them are from the Twin Cities, so they might recognize you.
Yeah.
But I want to share this. I've shared this before in my podcast, but I think you might enjoy the reaction. I've been doing it more often just to see how different people react. So the most embarrassing moment came in my first season covering the WNBA. It was the Camp Day game, Minnesota, Atlanta.
Mm.
Atlanta didn't send their PR. I know some visiting teams don't, so it can be a little trickier to coordinate that way. So I thought the locker room was open, and the security guard thought it was open because the door was open. So she's like, "Oh, you can go
Oh
in there to get my
no.
interviews." And I just happened to walk in while the entire Atlanta team was changing out of their uniform.
Oh no.
And in the
That
most
is
professional way
awkward.
possible, I turned around and went back out.
Okay,
I was
goodbye.
like,
Yeah, that's oof,
it's
that's tough. I kind of
well,
knew where that was going, but
you
that's
did, but still, I mean, you can put two and two together. A
ooh,
guy walking in a locker room full of women, that could have gone south in a hurry.
easy, easy. Okay. You just leave
like,
and you don't talk about
nope.
it and
Well, I didn't talk about it, but everyone else did. Not on the press corps, but there, some of the links, game day staffers that are there, like interns or I don't know what positions they hold. they would hang around for a while. Part of the game day team that handles uniforms, does all of
Oh man.
the gritty work, the meat and
Yeah.
potatoes work you don't see.
Yep.
Years later, they were still talking about it. They're like, "You remember
Oh
that one guy
man.
that walked in the locker room?" I'm like,
Oh
"Yeah, that was
no.
me."
Oh, that's uncomfortable.
Well, it's good. I've been sharing that story just to see how folks respond to it. Delisha Milton Jones almost hit the floor laughing. And I think our Mitzi Harrington did the same thing because they know it's like, yeah, that could have gone
That could
real
have
bad.
been really bad for
Someone else,
you for sure.
yeah, well, for me, yes, or somebody else. Again, I think me, I don't have any like malicious or malevolent
Oh yeah, no,
ideas.
nothing like that.
Whenever I meet a woman for the first time, I don't look at them as like, oh, can I score with them? You know what I'm saying? It's
Yeah,
like,
like
no,
yeah.
I've always goes back to one of Fred Rogers, one of his philosophies or his three rules: be kind, and be kind.
There
So
you
I'm
go.
like, they're athletes, or yes, they're athletes that may be big names for all the fans. I'll never forget when the Lynx won their first title. At first, there was indifference about this Lynx beat writing gig that I had, and then there was some envy because, like, yeah, you get to cover a champion. I'm like,
Yeah, you
I
get the
don't
winner.
like. That's not why I'm doing it. I mean, yeah, it was. I'll never forget watching Maya hit that game winner in 2015 in
Oof.
Game 3 of the finals in 1.7 seconds. And at first, when the shot went in, I was just going through so many emotions. That was the one time I lost it, and like even the most stoic of us, I remember a time when Michelle Vopel, and it's like, hey, how do you? We we have that aura, that game face we put on, but there are times where it's like, hey, holy, like holy shit,
Yeah.
there's some
It's like,
exciting moment.
whoa, yeah.
And she's a diehard Cardinals fan, so like,
Yep.
yay, we're
Yep.
all sports fans, and we still are. I
Yeah.
would folks would give me a hard time last year with Major League Baseball because of the work I was doing. It's like, I bet you're cheering for the Twins. I'm like, would it be cool? Yes. But I'm like, no, that's not why I'm here. I'm representing MLB. And so as long as I'm wearing that credential, I will. I will represent MLB to the best of my ability. Again, it goes back to I have no control over what happens. So you don't get worked up about it. But yeah, I'll never forget working game 3 of the finals and seeing Maya hit that buzzer beater. And I'm going, did she
Oof.
get that off in 1.7 seconds? And I
Wild.
remember taking one quick glance at the big board. And by that point, Conseco Fieldhouse or Banker's Life had the giant, I call like, it's like how Dale Earnhardt Jr. called the spoilers in NASCAR stock cars for plate tracks giant ass spoilers. I'm like, that's a giant scoreboard. You know what I'm talking about. Everyone has
Yeah.
them now. And so one quick glance, and I'm like, yep, that went off. I'm like, I saw all I needed to
Um,
see. But I'm like, but to have enough time to put a side fade on, a shot fake, and then release it in 1.7, I thought it couldn't have been done, but she did. But it's Maya. I mean, should I have been surprised? But that was a moment being on hand to see the Lynx win at Williams Arena in 2017. Lindsay Whalen, that storybook ending, winning a title at the same venue where she was a household name. She was the reason I got into women's basketball, or at least a big part of it. I remember the Gophers Final Four run, and I don't know. I wrote a kind of an editorial about it. I don't know if you read this, but in that Final Four run, one of the local Twin Cities newscasters got behind them. And it wasn't like I was hating on women's sports back then. I was just more indifferent. But then I see this big name newscaster get behind the team, and I'm like, well, if this guy can throw his weight behind a women's team, I guess it's all right. I don't regret that decision. I've never had the chance to tell him either, but I've been on hand to cover some offspring of some notable people. And then when I hear all these Paige Becker stories, in my head, I'm going, yeah, I knew about her long before you did. But what I've enjoyed most about it is, I don't have any kind of rapport with Paige. I actually have a pretty good rapport with her father. Uh, but it goes back to a women's semi-pro basketball team that I covered. So it had nothing to do with Paige, but a lot of her high school teammates at Hopkins would see me at games, and then they started following me. And it's like I take that as a badge of honor that these future leaders, as I call them, the next generation, they look up to you, and like that means a lot. That even kids from the big name school in Hopkins, where they were big celebrities last year, they had Slam cover them for a series. They thought it was cool, and they see you as someone you can reach out to. So it's hard for me to say what the top moment is because I never know when the next one is coming. But
There you go.
to build that kind of rapport where I'm talking to these athletes, whether they're in high school, college, or the pros, as if I would be talking to my neighbor, that's kind of how I look at it. Is I Yes, it's fun to see you play and to watch you get buckets, but I want to know what you eat for breakfast. I want to know your favorite movie. I'm trying to remind my audience that these athletes are more than the stat line and the records would suggest. That at some point, like yourself, even if you weren't the star athlete at Elon University, you're going to be eventually contributing in other ways. And I want people to get a glimpse of what that's going to look like. That was a really long-winded answer, but when you get I guess two sports guys, I guess it's inevitable because all these moments we've been on hand to see just bring back so many stories and moments, and it's great. I know we've been talking for a while, Erica, but I do want to leave you with this if we don't have time to cover anything else. I don't think anyone's going to know what 2021 brings. Heck, I don't know what the next 2 weeks are going to bring. The inauguration, I think we're all going to be watching closely.
Oh
But
boy. Yeah.
with your work in sports and the platforms that you've built, I know a few of us were joking about getting you on the broadcast team for NBC and NBCSN for the NWHL playoff coverage this year. Maybe it will happen. I don't know.
Hey, we can still hope.
I've joked that I called some games with Alexis at the high school level for Town Square, and I joked with her, I'm like, one day we're going to be hearing about you on NBC and NBCSN, and because I know she's another fun story. She she didn't play a lot of hockey, but she, like yourself, just got hooked on into it and now turned into a broadcaster. And she just watches a lot of it. And I think it speaks to the fact that for some who come after us because, oh, you didn't play the sport, what do you know? I'm like, maybe there's some things we don't get, but that doesn't mean we don't understand the sport. I never played a minute of basketball, but I'm a basketball analyst for Junior All Star. So I have to break down highlight film, and I'm learning a lot about pick and rolls, for example, and screens and how that all works. And you still can pick up on trends and tendencies that way. So I would say you and Alexis are living proof that you don't have to be former players to understand how the sport works. But whatever happens, what do you hope to accomplish? What are some, I don't want to say goals because I think the goals, you don't even know what goals you're going to set. They just happen. So it would be foolish to ask you, what do you want to do? Because your next opportunity is probably going to come out of thin air. But where do you see this growing with the opportunities you've built? You've had an opportunity to get published in some prestigious publications now. That's not something everyone can say. I don't know what the future is going to hold, but how do you see yourself growing as a writer, as an advocate for the BIPOC community, all of it? What does 2021 look like? And I guess what comes next? That's probably the weirdest or strangest question to ask given your history. But
Yeah.
yeah, what comes next? What would a future Erica Ayala like to do?
Wow, yeah, that's a great question, and I think I've been trying to figure that one out. I say sometimes that I've been really lucky. Um, I had my dream job, and that was working for the Children's Defense Fund. You mentioned that, but being able to work for the New York office, the state that I grew up in, really meant a lot to me. And being able to be a child advocate means a lot to me. Um, and I got to work at the organization that kind of really taught me the ropes, so to speak. at a very young age. I mean, fresh out of college, more or less. So I don't know. I would like to think that for me, the future will be about creating the the highway, right? Creating the highway. I keep going back to Sonic Highways, Buddy Guy, looking for a dime, found a quarter. I want for the future of sports journalism to be an easier road for women of color. I want sports journalism to do a better job of taking care for the stories of athletes when they share very intimate parts um, of who they are and how they see the world. Um, and so I don't know, I'm kind of, like I said, taking YouTube classes and trying to learn media, multimedia, and different kinds of things like that, because I see value in, again, creating those highways. Um, if I have to build them myself, they won't be the prettiest, but then another thing that Buddy Guy says is, hey, all you got to do is be the best in town to the best come round. So if I can, because of my experience, open up someone else to, again, really take really good care with intimate stories about racism, sexism, homophobia, talking about those types of stories that we know athletes experience, um, and create an on ramp to the sports journalism space where that's more of the norm, and we're not screaming into the void about people getting athlete activist of the year wrong, and we're not ostracizing athletes for burning sage before basketball games, which is a very spiritually healing practice for certain communities. For those who don't know, I'm talking about Kyrie Irving. um, I want to see that, and I know that's possible. And I know, we know, the WNBA being a case study of sorts, if you will, that when we do that in sports, uh, when we do that in sports, the society is better. Again, I studied social movements, civil rights movement, apartheid in South Africa. And the one constant is, well, there's a few of them. One of them is that children are at the forefront and take the risks that adults are not willing to take. But the other is that when we mainstream movements or the awareness of movements, it comes from a lot of times athletes, to the point where organizers target athletes in recruitment. We've seen Jackie Robinson get involved in his later years. We've seen athletes run for political office after retirement. So that separation between sports and politics has never existed. It's just a convenient lie that we tell. And I want to bust that myth wide open and show that there is congruence there. Um, and so maybe that's my goal. What that looks like, I don't know if there's a concrete job. Uh, Let me know, Mike, because you're the one that went to J school, so I'll have to rely on you. But that's the path that I see myself on. And so again, just got to be the best in town till the best come round.
That's been my philosophy because, as you know, it's a cutthroat industry. It can be really difficult to make your way through traditional routes. So, yeah, I'm just spent the last year so on branding and building things up. When I saw my YouTube channel pass 10,000 subscribers, I'm like, all right, people really enjoy this stuff. And my most watched sport is women's basketball. I never would have guessed that even 5 years ago because of the niche value at the time. Not that I wouldn't cover it, but then over time I saw I'm getting more views for that than any men's games that I do. And mind you, I've covered the likes of Jalen Suggs, who's at Gonzaga, who will probably go in the NBA, and Chad Holmgren, who's another big name from around here. I've covered some of the biggest names in men's basketball. Tyler Johnson, who was a football basketball crossover at Minneapolis North, now with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But it's the women's games that draw people in. I'm like, all right, well, the first rule of mass media, at least as according to a James Bond film, Tomorrow Never Dies, is give the people what they want. I don't know if that's the life lesson. I don't know if that was the intent, but this conversation has reminded me of all of your pop culture knowledge and references that you make. You and I think could challenge each other. Actually, we do better as a tag team on a trivia night for that reason.
Yeah, right. Annihilate the competition.
I don't think Ari and the others would have a chance against us.
Not at all.
Oh, it would be fun. And this is, I guess, my dream. And maybe these are smaller compared to yours, but like my dream scenario would be to get you and Ari together on a future podcast for this series, because I love to document oral history. And I know with my YouTube channel, I can do that. I don't have to worry about what happens if a site closes up like Excel. And I loved writing with that site for a season when it was around. But I'm like, getting you, well, I know you've done some chats with Blake. I think that would be a lot of fun too. But to get like you and Alexis together on the women's hockey side, or you and Ari, we'll just not compare credentials, but I think you know what I'm saying. Just have some fun, because Ari is kind of sheepish about her 30 under 30. And I know you're not doing this for the awards, but you got a 40 under 40.
Let's go.
New York nonprofit.
I did. That's
PG
right.
Sport. So it's like, if there was like some epic, maybe an epic rap battle edition, what do you think? Like, that'd be my dream, is like getting some of these friends that I've met, whether I've only seen them once or multiple times, and just have them come on and just talk shop, because you spoke of getting more opportunities for women of color. Ari Chambers, yourself, emblematic of that. Look at all the press that Ari's been getting with the Forbes 30 under 30. And even before then, with the Bleacher Report, the Highlight Her series, you have expanded your portfolio to include writing, podcasting. And now the two of you have some distinctions. LaChina Robinson, I remember meeting her. She and I haven't talked for a while, but still supportive of each other. She's another person through a Rising Stars program. And Leah B. Olson, I don't know if the name rings a bell with you. She's maybe not as national as the rest of you are, but has covered Lynx telecasts for years, does a lot in the community, former Gopher. And I think she actually did some national games for ESPN back in the day. But another figure whose presence alone can inspire other women of color to get involved in storytelling. So that's why it would be kind of a dream for me to have like yourself and Ari and maybe some others come together. Like you said at the start, I won't know what it's like, because I can't change the pigmentation of my skin. And let's be honest, if I tried to, it would look really weird. I don't think it would work.
We don't want that. Unfortunately, we have a few examples of people who have done that, and it's just not our path. It's not our path. That's okay.
I am okay. Folks have joked about my melanin or lack thereof. I'm like, hey, you know, I can't change that, but I can do my best to be a welcoming presence. If there's ever a chance in hell of me becoming a big name in sports media, I would love to be known as the Fred Rogers of broadcasters, someone who was welcoming to everyone and didn't let my personal feelings get in the way of that. That was one of my favorite shows growing up. And
I love that. I actually, like, you said it, and I was like, we should make this a thing. I'm Auntie.
Which one a thing?
You be the Mr. Rogers.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. We're gonna make that a thing, Mike, for sure.
I am curious though, as we do wrap this up, if we ever, well, I've said that for a while, at some point, it might take 3 more hours, but
Who
You
knows?
do have your social justice in women's hockey series on YouTube, and I know you do some other work as well. If you could give us a glimpse or a tease, since you have your podcast and you've invested a lot, as I've listened to, with your podcasting to sound
Yes.
like you're in a studio, even at your New York apartment,
Yes.
what are some glimpses or teases? What can we expect from your YouTube channel with your podcasters, whether it's your social justice and women's hockey or other sports? Because as you and I can attest to through this conversation, there's no limit to the impact our work in sports can bring. What can we expect from your channel?
Well, thank you for asking. Unfortunately, a lot of the reasons that it was the right time to have a conversation about race and racism in sports, we're seeing a lot of those feelings and incidents reverberate again throughout our country in particular. Um, so I do have some plans on how to bring back some of the voices that we've heard. I've expanded that. A lot of times we talk about anti Black racism, which is extremely important. And there is a reason why that often is the focal point. But I also want to challenge people to think about other marginalized communities and how we perpetuate um, systemic oppression of people in sports. And so I have some of those things that I've already, put in the can, so to speak, and others that I'm working on. But I also want to pivot direction a little bit, especially for BIPOC players, and not always ask them about racism, but ask them about their culture, and allow them, not allow, excuse me, empower them and provide the space for them to share not just their worst trauma in dealing with racism, but what they're most proud of. And so that's something that I'm going to be integrating into the social justice space, because social justice is not just talking about injustice, it's uplifting the expectation that we want to see. And I am still doing pieces here and there. I think there's some publications that I've written for in 2020 that I look forward to writing for in 2021 as well. So I have a few things I'm working on that will come out, something on USAB and how they've had to switch gears because the Olympics should have happened by now had it not been for coronavirus. So I've been talking to some people for that story. I have some stories placed for WNBA 25th season. I'm really excited about that. And I will continue to level up my gear. I've soundproofed my you and I have talked about this, but I've soundproofed my wall. But I live right on First Avenue, which is an extremely busy street in New York City. So the next step is to get better curtains that will keep the sound out and maybe a little bit more of the cold. I live in an old apartment building, so I've got all kinds of drafts. But my desk, as you can see, is right here by my window. So that might have to be the next level up from the tech side or the gear side of things.
Our work is never done. We're always trying to find ways to get better. And that's been my motto. Sometimes you can overdo it, as I've learned from a personal perspective. But after I got 10,000, it's like, all right, what do I have to do to add a zero, get 100,000? I'm not expecting that to happen overnight. But again, just experimenting, innovating. And that's what led into the podcast series. Since I can't cover a lot of sports right now, I can still share stories and stay involved. So when the time is right, I can get back out there. I don't know how tight your connection is with Ari, but if you're able to, would you mind sending her a request saying, "Hey, Mike wants to get you and Erica on to talk shop. Maybe we'll do like a, I don't know, would you rather type thing, or do some rapid fire games." But
That would
like
be fun.
I would love to see that happen. And I don't know if you have any branding experts or people, but when you spoke of making me the Fred Rogers of broadcasters, I'm like, all right, if you're the anti, because I remember when we first met, I was kind of called Howard Jr. in reference to Howard Maydahl, one of our mutual friends and colleagues. But I'm like, I to, and I took that as a badge of appreciation, but it's like, no, I want Howard to be, he's still out there. He's still making content. He's still making
Right,
his voice heard.
right,
Fred Rogers is no longer with us, but I want that passion, that vibe, that character that he established for so long. I want that to live on. Not gonna lie, like I was a huge fan of the Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood movie when Tom Hanks played him, and it brought me back. uh, but that's a pop culture podcast you and I would have to tackle. I don't know how many topics you and I could explore, but I think it would number in the thousands, Erica. That's what I've learned in these last
easy.
couple of hours.
Easy. And, again, we met and we were kind of put on camera shortly after meeting. But this has reminded me just how much fun it is to connect with people. I have not been calling any hockey games recently. And oh, that's another thing, I guess. I'm expecting to do some collaborations and have some reunions with a few NWHL broadcasters. So we'll have to keep a lookout for that, hoping that comes to fruition. But it's nice to vibe with people. So yes, I will. I know Ari is extremely busy and she is notorious on social media for not always responding to her text messages, but I am confident that we can work something out, and I think it'll be fun. I've never been interviewed alongside Ari Chambers. I'm usually either talking with her or helping her do an interview. So I think that would be a lot of fun. So we should try to get that happening.
Well, maybe this will get her attention. And I know what you're saying, but I'm always mindful of the fact that we have duties and obligations, some more than others. When all of the restrictions are lifted, whether it's through vaccinations or taming this virus, you and I will probably get back out in the field. But until then, we're just trying to stay involved and stay safe. But there's no one right way to do this. So yeah, I would be happy if you could set that up. And if anyone else wants to come on, I'd say go for it, because that All-Star game, all the connections I built from that one game, learning about you and working alongside Ari for that orange carpet event and
Yeah.
seeing how she was dressed to the nines. We talked about that. I'm like, I know what you're
Yes.
talking about. And
Yes.
then watching her make her way through the pregame and postgame interviews, and I'm going, you could just like, why is she not part of a late night team? Because I got that vibe with all the fun and the laughs and kind of the looseness she was able to get out of the players from that one All-Star game, whether it was Stewie or Brittany Griner kind of quipping about the flagrant fouls she had at the time. And I'm just like, I don't know how Ari does it, but I wish I had a fraction of that.
Yeah.
But everyone contributes, and that collective is what makes us stronger. And I'm looking forward
Exactly.
to following more of your work through your YouTube channel or your writing. I've tuned into some of your live broadcasts, as you might have seen, because it's like,
Yes.
hey, here's somebody who speaks the language. I don't know a whole lot about women's hockey. I won't be the, I'm not going to lie about that. But much like women's basketball, I'm not going to denigrate it because I know how much it means to those who are fans. And when the Whitecaps joined the NWHL, every home game was a sellout. Now there's going to be a 6 team. So the NWHL will make its way to Canada. And maybe we'll get lucky and find another franchise that can help bridge the gap between Minnesota and everyone else, because we're kind of out in this little bubble. We're out in this little snow globe of our own.
Yeah, exactly. All by yourself.
All by ourselves. But hey, we got the Tria rink, and you've seen the sellout crowds.
Oh yeah.
I mean, and I'd say it's pretty good when you're, I guess, one for one. They're still the most recent champion. I don't know
Yep.
how defending champion works, but they're the most recent one. To get that in your first season, it's like, well, they're not fooling around. So, the Lynx and Whitecaps, they've got 5 titles between them. The men's teams, we're still waiting. I don't know. how that looks, but it's funny, and I think it speaks to what their impact has done. Obviously, it helps to be on top, but I think beyond that, the Lynx won 4 titles. Whether or not you call it a dynasty, I don't think it really matters because they were the second team to win 4 championships. And it took a long time for anyone to match Houston. So to get 4 championships and to do it the way they did, that had an impact. How many women's basketball players at the high school level and even at the college level were watching those games and maybe took their play up a notch? The Whitecaps winning the first championship. Maybe they didn't get the whole ticker tape parade or the coverage that the Wild would receive if they ever won the championship, for example. But for all those people who bought in, those early birds who stuck with them before the NWHL invited them,
Yeah,
to see that happen in their first season, and folks like yourself out east, you had covered the league already, I believe. Now you get to hear a little more, learn a little more about us, and it sounds like you already have established connections with some of the Minnesota players.
for sure.
So it's amazing what these championships have done to change our culture around women's sports. We still have a ways to go to match the men, but I always remind folks, and I talk about this with fellow sports fans, in the case of the Lynx, its brother league, the NBA, had a 50-year head start before the WNBA came around. And they struggled for a long time. It took them about 20, 30 years, I think. It wasn't until the Larry Bird Magic Johnson rivalry where the NBA started to become the product it was. It took them a long time. The NFL went through a lot of growing pains. The NHL, they had 6 teams for years, like for decades even. I don't think they expanded until 67.
Wow.
So these
Takes
things take
time.
these things take time. Back then we didn't have social media or blogs or all this stuff to throw our stupid hot takes about viewership. As you said, the women's leagues got more viewership than the men did. Uh, for what reasons? I guess we'll see now that the men's leagues are playing more traditional seasons. But like you had said, when every other league saw a drop in viewership, the women's leagues saw growth. So you have to remember a lot of the things we have now didn't exist when these big time men's leagues were still in their infancy. If you can remember that, it's something I tell myself, even though I would love to see a few more WNBA teams as a basketball fan to give players that are on the bubble more opportunities to play, it takes time and it takes a lot of patience, more than maybe we would like to exhibit, but it can be done. Look, in the 25th season, the 25th anniversary season of the WNBA. 5 years ago, I remember when they celebrated their 20th, folks were still wondering, how long will this last? I think Michelle Vopel said at some point that question stops because people ask, is this the year they fold up? Well, that hasn't happened yet. But we're talking about the WNBA in a much stronger position than I would say they were 5 years ago. So this 25th anniversary season, I don't know what it's going to look like, but I'd like to think that this will be one of those turning points that began last year with the Wubble and went back to 2016, as you spoke of. I think we're going to see some impressive milestones with the women's leagues. I can't say when. I don't want to put a timestamp on it because we have no idea what tomorrow's going to bring with this pandemic. But I feel more confident than I did 5 years ago, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I hear you. A lot has changed in the last 4 or 5 years. The landscape is changing. Social media and just technology in general, I think, has really accelerated things. And, when I speak to Anya Packer, who's the executive director of the NWHL Players Association, or Terry Jackson, who's a part of or the executive director, excuse me, of the WNBPA, the WNBA Players Association, the thing that is arbitrarily set, which the market believes to be a negative thing, is that women's sports have to be more nimble. They have to do more, and they do more with with a lot less. But that nimbleness in amid a worldwide pandemic allows them to tap into different things such as Twitch, for the NWSL and the NWHL, such as thinking of different brand partnerships and deals for the Wubble, for WNBA players, or truly, again, their Social Justice Council, which was a first of its kind partnership between the Players Association and the league, but really was something that WNBA players knew they not only wanted, but essentially demanded. Without a focus on social justice, the 2020 WNBA season was a non starter. And because of the hard work that they put in for the 23 seasons prior, they were able to get that, because we need athletes. I would like to see us take care of athletes if we say we need them as much as we do, but that's, I suppose, a whole nother conversation for another 3-hour podcast, Mike. But but it's really empowering, to see women make the most, um, even when they're given the least. And I'm excited for what 25 seasons of the WNBA is going to look like, and the success of the WNBA in year 25 and beyond, or season 25 and beyond, is extremely important because it allows the younger leagues, excuse me, I ran out of water. It allows the younger leagues to reach those milestones quicker. So the NWHL is in their 6th season, but in season 5, they negotiated a 50-50 revenue split. That's something that the WNBA just got into their new CBA. Things like that. And we're also starting to see again that those highways, right, that I keep talking about, the interlacing of women in sports is also making all of the leagues stronger. And as all of the athletes, individual athletes, the owners, the coaches, as they integrate, um, again, the policy or the advocacy side of women's sports, that's going to elevate the sport even more. The product is already the best. Again, Minnesota has titles, the Lynx, and the Whitecaps, that the men's professional teams with millions of dollars being poured into them don't have. That's just one example, but we see that time and time again. Women's national team soccer, women's national team basketball, our deaf women's soccer team, our US hockey team, and on and on and on. So one day it's going to come to the tipping point, and there will be no more excuses, and it is already bad business, but it will be undeniably true that it is bad business and bad policy to arbitrarily and artificially lower the market for women's sports.
I have an anecdote that I want to add to this conversation from a local point of view. There is an organization called Breakdown USA. They publish guidebooks, kind of encyclopedias for several high school sports in Minnesota for folks like myself, since you can't always talk to coaches or players with the high school windows. It's not like the college level.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm good friends with one of the publishers of that magazine or that guidebook. And he said their most popular publication is the girls basketball one. There was one year where it sold out. I couldn't get a copy. And I remember talking with a recruiter for a job I interviewed for. I didn't get it, but he said he was most enthusiastic about the women's sports because he said that's where our most passionate audience is. And that is something I've learned since I got into women's sports. It doesn't always have the glamour, but the people who are into it can't get enough of it. So you're going to get passionate, knowledgeable fans 99 times out of 100 because they care about it. I am wondering though, if in the case of the NWHL, if Toronto's going to start a trend and if they get a seventh team, are we going to see their name become the seven? Because I've never heard of six. I know of Sixers with Philadelphia and 49ers, so it's not like numbers are are foreign to pro teams, but the Toronto Six, I'm going, if I ever had to write an article, it might take me a minute to get used to writing the six in a game recap.
Well, I don't think they'll become the seven, and there's two reasons. One is because they were the sixth NWHL team.
I meant for another team, not Toronto itself.
Oh,
but if there
okay,
is
that makes
like
sense.
if there's a seventh NWHL team, will
Well,
they call themselves the seven?
I think the name comes from like Toronto, like the sixth district or district. I don't know, something. There's something about Toronto. I'm clearly not Canadian or a Torontonian, so don't take my word for it. But something about a nickname for Toronto. Apparently, also Drake refers to it as the six. They are not 716. Isn't that might be Buffalo? I think that's Buffalo, but their area code or something is there's a six in there. So that's where that comes from. But I guess if there was going to be an NWHL team called the Sevens, I mean, Seventh Ward, isn't that New Orleans, right?
Just to confirm with you, Erica, 716 is the area code for Buffalo. Toronto's
That's what I
is
thought.
416.
416.
It's
Okay, I was like,
416.
716 is not right, but it's also not that far off.
and Drake is one of their favorite sons. So yeah, if you can tie in a Drake reference to
Yeah,
a sports team, why not?
why not? Although if the Drake curse is still real, I don't know. Toronto, the Raptors
keep
might
them
have
away
gotten
from
rid
the
of
six
that.
games.
Yeah. That was like one of my favorite topics to talk to athletes about because I'm indifferent at best about Drake, but I just love that apparently he had like this very well-known curse about him, but that might be gone now that the Raptors have won an NBA title.
Well, supposedly there was a LeBron curse too, and he got them a title in Cleveland. So I
There you
don't
go.
get into curses like that just because I feel like it's just one of those things that you can let things get into your head.
Agreed.
And this is coming from a guy where I was too young to remember the 87 or 91 World Series, but we haven't thrown around any curses since then with the Twins. A little young to remember those days. I've had my shares of heartbreak with the Vikings, but I know, hey, it's a game. I can't control what happens, so I just go along for the ride.
There you go.
But you spoke of the 3-hour podcast that we've been having. I'm convinced if there is a way to get Ari Chambers and maybe some others, I don't know who else would join you in a panel, but I'm almost positive if you and Ari were to come on, we would hit 3 hours tops, and I wouldn't even have to ask a single question. I would probably just
true.
go. I would sit back, maybe have some of my water.
Yeah,
and just watch the two.
I did not properly hydrate. I had to reach over and get some of my Werther's originals.
There you go.
To keep going.
I'm convinced.
This is all you'd have to do, Mike, is just mention Ja Rule. Like, hey, Ari, Ja Rule, and then we're done. We just sit back and let her take over.
Ja Rule, Candace Parker.
Exactly.
I don't know who else gets her going. Energy. That's your tagline.
Yeah, exactly. Hashtag energy. So that's it.
If you're just joining us late, what started as this oral history podcast has now turned into ways of how we can get Ari to open up without her realizing it. So if you have any tips, if you're watching this on YouTube and you're a friend of Ari's or know her work, just send us some tips or pointers. Like, here are some conversations or topics that will get her pontificating for hours on end. But she brings a lot of energy. You bring a lot of energy in your own way. But yeah, I'm like, I want to see this happen now. I would start the podcast. I'll mention Ja Rule and then just watch the rest of you go at it. And you don't. And the funny thing is too, LaChina is now getting into that pop culture landscape on her own podcast series. And
Yes.
she has her stance too. I know she's a big Jay-Z fan. So,
Oh man.
she's, there's like, there's some, there's some stands among us. And for me, I mean, I came across Pluto TV, and this would lead to another podcast. I might talk about my reflections of American Gladiators, for example, the original series, because that was one of my favorite
Oh,
shows.
snap.
And you know what? I have to credit shows like that for instilling this idea in me that women can compete just as hard and be just as talented as the men, because uh, it made a star out of folks like Wesley Berry and Peggy Odita all those years ago. And I didn't realize it back then, but I enjoyed it because I thought it mixed sort of that entertainment value that you saw in pro wrestling without going over the top. But they treated the broadcast, they treated those shows like a professional sporting event, or as some writers put it, they took it just seriously enough. They knew to have fun, but they didn't let it get to their heads. They knew the product itself, and the stars were the contenders and gladiators. But that was a stand of mine.
Love
So
that show.
I've
Love
and to this day, I may be the only writer, at least to my knowledge, that isn't afraid to drop Pokemon references. That's another
Nice.
franchise celebrating its 25th year.
Gotta catch them all.
Yep. So
Gotta
yeah,
catch them
maybe
all. Oh, I love
you know
it.
what? Maybe I would find a way to fit into this pop culture
I think you're doing all right.
deal with
I
you
think
and
you're doing all
Ari.
right.
Oh, all right. Well, that is going to be one of my missions now for 2021. Getting you and Ari together just to see what would happen, because I think so many of us would enjoy it.
For sure.
But Erica, it was fun talking with you for all this time. I know you have some other things that you would like to get to, but we'll have to do this again, because I
Oh,
feel like we just scratched
absolutely.
the surface, even though we've been talking for years, I think, at
Yeah.
this point.
Yes, exactly. Especially in quarantine time, right?
Yeah.
But
And
Mike, thank you so much. It was really great to reconnect. Like I said, we had that like throw him in front of camera energy, right? To quote Ari back in 2018. And it was just like picking up right from there. So I'm thankful for this opportunity to chat with you. And you really did get me thinking about some stuff. Got me talking about my award, which I never do. I'm gonna have to like slice that clip and send it to Blake and be like, "Oh my God, look what Mike made me say about you."
you want to know what, Erica? And it feel free to splice it, but you should splice that and send that to Ari too, and be like, yeah, and see,
Right.
and try to trick her into talking about that 30 under 30, because she hates that.
Or maybe I shouldn't send it to her and we have to confirm her first. And then just like you did for me, you like sucker her into getting all emo deep on it.
Well, it was that award that led me to thinking, hey, why not bring her on? Because it was, you're in the wake of that, but use that as an opportunity to talk about your history. Because, like we said before, we're not doing this for the awards, the recognition, but it's a fun perk
Hey, it doesn't
to,
hurt. Doesn't hurt. That's for sure.
I mean, it doesn't hurt. It's like that's something you could add on the resume. But I know you will continue to be an influencer, even if you never win another award for the rest of your life. So that in itself is going to make you a powerful writer and broadcaster and citizen. And I can't wait to see what comes your way. So whatever you're doing, keep it up.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mike. I appreciate it. And hey, like I said, I'm still learning YouTube. So you're going to have to teach me some tricks of the trade.
A lot of it is persistence, I'll tell you that much.
There
But
you go.
you got to start somewhere, right?
Exactly.
Well, well, thanks again to Erica Ayala, the freelance multimedia journalist. You can catch her on the Founding Four podcast, her YouTube channel, and who knows where her byline will end up. Will it be The Athletic, the New York Times, Sports Illustrated, Washington Post, ESPN? Who knows? But wherever she ends up, if you see a story written by her, it's worth checking out. And if you'd like to join us on a future episode of this podcast series, just contact us on social media at the Mike Peden on Twitter or Instagram. All you need is a story, and we'd be happy to share it. So until next time, thanks for watching.